Hello, everyone, and welcome to Come to Your Senses Understanding Touch, Taste, Smell, and Balance. Presented by Gabby Lieberman, Caitlin Gonzalez, and Nico Mania.
Rocky tastes the blood, smells the sweat, feels the pain, or does he? Hears the crowd, and struggles to stay upright. It ain't about how hard you hit, it's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward. The famous words of Rocky Balboa could also apply to our senses. Like in a prize fight. Every minute of every day, our senses are bombarded by blows from so many directions: the environment, our past experiences, and even the way we were born. Leading us to our essential question: how are our senses influenced by our biology, psychological state, social norms, and each other?
Touch sensory receptors. Touch, or our tactile sense, uses different receptors to detect and interpret multiple sensations. These sensations include pressure, warmth, cold, and pain. Areas of our skin and body have different sensitivities to these sensations. For example, stroking the line near your lower stomach will create a tickling sensation. This is because of the many pressure receptors that are present in that area. Thermoreceptors detect temperature changes in both warm and cold. Warm receptors will turn up their signal rate when they detect a heat transfer into the body. An example of this can be if you accidentally touch your stovetop while cooking. Cold receptors, on the other hand, increase their firing rate during a heat transfer out of the body. An example of this is when you apply an ice pack and feel an intense stinging sensation on your skin. Our tactile senses are the mixture of these four feeling or sensations. Let's delve a little deeper into the pain sensation and receptors. The sensation of pain can aid in the detection of an imbalance in homeostasis. It is the body's way of notifying that something is wrong. Without the sensation of pain, the body will not be able to detect or protect itself from certain dangers. Not only does the sense of pain protect you from further physical damage, but it also plays a very important psychological role. It amplifies one's sense of pleasure, as it could be used as in the comparison of pleasure versus pain. Psychologically, one is more drawn to pleasurable experiences as it strays further and further away from the priorly compared to senses of pain. Furthermore, it enhances our self-awareness as we are able to detect any stimuli that causes pain. And lastly, it arouses others' empathy, promoting different social connections, as people tend to check on one another when someone displays that they are experiencing pain. That is why the rare cases of people born without the ability to feel pain are so detrimental. Without the warnings that pain sensation provides, they are unable to detect when something can be harmful to themselves or to others. On the opposite end, what is chronic pain? Chronic pain is a persistent sensation that does not turn off. Examples of chronic pain include arthritis or intense headaches. These can be caused due to severe illnesses or injuries. Remember, pain is a biopsychosocial event, meaning that the perception of pain may vary across different biological, psychological, and social-cultural environments. A higher pain, for example, an injury-prone person who was raised in an athletic environment may have a higher pain tolerance to knee scrapes than those who did not. This is because they experienced the sensation many times before, and their body knows what to expect.
So let's get into a specific type of touch receptor: nociceptors. Nociceptors are used to detect painful stimuli. So they will fire if they receive a cut, a burn, or anything else that might be harmful towards our body. So those stimuli will cause a nociceptor to fire, and then it will follow a chain of neurons up to the spinal cord, which will then relay the signal to our brain and have us to experience pain. So why do we experience pain? Pain tells our body that something dangerous is happening and that we need to move away, stop whatever is happening, and heal. Without nociceptors and pain reception, these potentially harmful actions could continue for an extended period of time, causing permanent damage or maybe even death. So therefore, it's very important that we feel this pain. But are there ways to control pain? Yes. According to gauge control theory, pain will follow neurons up to the spinal cord, and at the spinal cord, there is a nerve gate that can open or close to either send signals to the brain or not send them. So how do we open and close this gate? Well, there's a couple ways. The first way you could close off the gate at the spinal cord is by stimulating non-painful neurons. Non-painful neurons will cause the gate to close and therefore stop the pain signal at the spinal cord. The second way is through endorphins. The neurotransmitter endorphins is released by your brain during times of excitement, laughter, or during physical exercise. The endorphins will then block off the gate at the spinal cord and once again stop the pain. So we commonly see this in athletes that during a game they will not really experience the full pain of the injury because the endorphins will help to block off that pain. But afterwards, they will feel the pain and then require medical attention. So what is the reason behind endorphins and why does our body release them? Well, the biological reason is that in times of danger or high stress, endorphins are necessary to keep your body from feeling the pain so you can continue to run or fight and get to a safer situation. Then once you've calmed down in the safer situation, your body lets you know that you've received pain, so you know that you need time to heal.
Pain perception. Psychological influences. Our perception of pain relies on the attention we focus on it. We tend to edit our memories of pain, meaning we often remember pain in ways different than what was actually experienced. We remember the peak point of pain, in other words, the worst moment or the worst feeling, and then the ending sensation. That is why when you experience pain that ends in pleasure, the final result is a skewed memory of what was actually experienced. A study done by Dr. Kahneman represents two groups, one who immersed their hands in freezing cold water for 60 seconds, and the other group which immersed their hands in the cold water, but then dipped their hands in warm water for 30 seconds afterwards. The group who ended the experiment in the 30 seconds of warm water reported a less painful experience in total than those whose pain ended abruptly. Pain is both a physical and psychological experience. As stated by David G. Myers, pain is a product of our attention, our expectations, and also our culture. Placebos work to trick the mind into changing one's physical state. They dampen the central nervous system's attention and responses to painful experiences as they change one's expectations to the sensory inputs. The belief that a placebo is in fact effective can trigger the body to release endorphins. Thus, when believing becomes reality, the mind unites with the body. In this video, the experimenter is attempting to convince the participant that the rubber hand is in fact their own. Let's watch.
From a robot hand to a rubber one, used by PhD students at the University of Freiburg to creatively fool the brain.
Whether you're into psychology or whether you're into stroking strangers' hands or indeed into cutlery, I think there really is something in here for everybody.
So why is he behaving like he's just been forked?
So initially, when he's just sitting there with the fake hand visible in front of him, he knows it's a fake hand. His eyes are telling him it's a fake hand. But when the stroking starts to happen and that information starts coming back from his real hand, those two messages start to conflict with each other. And bit by bit, he's starting to believe that this hand that he's seeing is in fact also the hand that he's feeling, even though it's not. So his body readjusts his understanding of where his body parts are and begins to believe that this fake hand here is actually part of his body.
So then when his friend comes in with a fork, his brain says, "Get out of the way, that's my hand."
But before you try this at home, a word of warning.
If you're going to try this at home, make sure you remember which one is the rubber hand before you stab it with a fork. That's the part you don't want to get wrong.
When mixing visual and physical stimuli, by stroking both the rubber and real hand repeatedly, the participant's mind is tricked into believing that the rubber hand is part of their body. When boom, the rubber hand is hit with the hammer and the participant suddenly jolts back. Again, when believing becomes reality, the mind unites with the body. The participant's mind unites with the experience of the rubber hand. A distraction works in similar ways as a placebo. As stated before, pain is a physical and psychological experience. Many times, when other sensory perceptions such as sight, hearing, or smell, and taste draw attention from the perception of pain, the tactile sense is overruled. When drawing attention away from painful stimulation, a brain's pathways that inhibit pain and increase pain tolerance are activated. That is why many athletes can continue playing after experiencing an injury. Their sensory inputs distract from the pain being experienced. As Charles Darwin said, pain is increased by attending to it.
In 5th grade, we used to do warhead challenges. A warhead is that tiny, sour-filled candy ball. Every time, it was the same. We all put it in our mouths at the same time, and one by one, my 10-year-old friends begin to actually cry. That's how strong a warhead is, and how effective our taste buds are. Taste buds coat the tongue and mouth, each holding hundreds of receptors. Each taste bud has pores that catch food chemicals. In the case of the warheads, 50 to 100 taste receptor cells were exploding because of their antenna-like hairs sensing the powerful candy. The receptors acknowledge sweet-tasting, salty, sour, umami, or bitter-tasting molecules. In the case of the warheads, each receptor passes on its message to a corresponding partner cell in the brain, quickly saying, "This is really sour." Here, this tongue map shows most sensitive areas. You can see different spots on your tongue are responsible for different tastes. If you accidentally burn your tongue, you shouldn't worry. In fact, taste receptors reproduce self-efficiently every week or two. And as one grows, the number of taste buds and taste sensitivity you have weakens. However, expectations also influence taste. Just like when we stood around in a circle of 5th graders, almost tasting the warheads even before we put one in our mouth.
Hello everyone and welcome to our experiment on taste. So I'm going to give our test subject here 5 different food substances, and she has to guess which of the 5 major tastes it's representing. So bitter, sour, salty, sweet, and umami. But in order to be a little tricky, a lot of the flavors are hidden within candy. So let's get the experiment started. Here is your first food item. Eat it and tell me what flavor you think it is. Bitter. Correct. So this is unsweetened chocolate, which is what I use to represent the bitter taste. So bitter, as you can see, often produces a pretty bad reaction. And it was used to warn our ancestors against potential toxins. So you find it in a lot of leafy greens and vegetables. That's one of the reasons why infants are so picky, because they act on that bitter impulse and try to avoid bitter foods. Okay, so trying our next one.
So it's chocolate, but it has salt on it, so salty.
Correct. So here we use a sea salt chocolate bar to demonstrate the flavor of salty. So salty is caused by salts, for example, sodium chloride, which is table salt, and it usually produces a pretty pleasurable taste experience, and it was meant for our ancestors to get their daily sodium and chlorine intake, which is essential for a lot of biological processes, including the firing of our neurons. All right, moving on to our next one.
Sour.
Correct. So here, using a sour gummy bear, we demonstrate the feeling of sour. So sour can obviously produce some negative taste effects, and that is because sour is usually associated with acidic compounds. So it's meant to warn us when things can be potentially harmful to our digestive system if they're too acidic. And it's often found in citrus fruits like lemons, grapefruits, as well as things like vinegar, or in this case, citric acid. Okay, our next one.
Umami.
Correct. So this is one of the most difficult flavors to comprehend, umami. So in this case, we use a seaweed chip, but umami is associated with a lot of major proteins. So you're going to find it in meats, seaweed, mushrooms, and it has kind of like an earthy flavor. Umami is meant to be really satisfying when you eat it, and the reason behind it is to make sure that our biological ancestors got all the necessary proteins they needed to survive. All right, here we're moving on to our last one. Sweet. Correct. So here we just used a milk chocolate, which has a very high sugar content to demonstrate the sweet flavor. Sweet usually produces a very pleasurable taste experience because for our biological ancestors, they need sugars in order to survive, and it's an easy source of energy. So because sugars like sucrose and fructose, which is found in fruit, taste very good, it encouraged our ancestors to eat more and therefore get the energy that they needed. Thank you so much for participating in our taste experience, and I hope that you all learned a little bit more about the 5 flavors. So at this point, you're probably asking, what about spicy? Isn't that a flavor too? Because I know I always had that question. Well, technically spicy isn't a flavor, but instead it's a sensation. Because it's not actually triggered by the taste receptor cells found in our taste buds. Instead, it's triggered by pain-receiving nociceptors in our mouth. Specifically, these nociceptors are linked with receiving heat-related pain, which is why eating spicy foods creates a hot sensation in your mouth. But why are the nociceptors triggered if nothing with a hot temperature is actually going into your mouth? Well, spicy foods, for example, spicy peppers, have a chemical. In peppers, it's capsaicin, but there's other chemicals in other spicy foods that trigger these nociceptors to go off. And that's why it tricks your brain into thinking that there's something hot in your mouth. The opposite of this sensation is caused by menthol, which is found in a lot of mint-flavored products, which is why mint-flavored products like mint gum often make your mouth feel cool or cold, even though it still remains at room temperature. So oftentimes you'll hear people saying not to drink water when they're having spicy foods, but why is that? Well, because the chemicals that have linked up to these receptors, for example capsaicin, often don't dissolve very easily in water. So when you drink water, instead of helping it flush down your system, you're actually just moving it around your tongue, therefore spreading it out even more and triggering more of these nociceptors. That's why they often recommend milk, which is usually a little bit better at dissolving these chemicals to help relieve the painful spicy sensation.
The smell test. Our sense of smell. The smell test. Our sense of smell is also known as olfaction. When air reaches the cluster of receptor cells located at the top of each nasal cavity, axon fibers alert the brain, and the sensation of smell is produced. It is important to note that due to evolution and smell being an extremely old and primitive sense, the sense of smell is not processed by the thalamus. Humans use senses of smell long before the full evolution of the cerebral cortex. Thus, the thalamus is bypassed. The process of olfaction allows for at least 1 trillion odors to be detected and interpreted by our body. It is hard for our bodies to specifically pinpoint odors by name. However, we have a remarkable capacity to recognize odors associated with different memories. Think of your grandmother's freshly baked cookies, or the smell of the Luddington bathrooms. Smell can easily associate with memories because the area of the brain receiving sensory input from the nose and its nerves runs right near the limbic system. Like stated before, sensory interpretations rely mainly on biopsychosocial factors. For example, the sense of smell will depend on different cultural experiences. Some environments will detect a certain smell as pleasurable, whilst others will think the smell is repulsive. For example, the odor of wintergreen is associated with candy or gum in the United States. Thus, it is viewed as a pleasurable smell. However, in Great Britain, the same odor is related to medicinal flavors, relating to very negative connotations and, therefore, making it a very negative odor. How may senses of smell vary across different populations? It is made apparent that women and young children have the very best senses of smell. As age increases, your ability to distinguish smells diminishes. Furthermore, smokers, those with alcohol disorders, patients with Alzheimer's or Parkinson's disease have a diminished sense of smell due to the disruptions caused in their olfactory systems as well. Let's switch things up and look at animals. Take this bear, for example. Animals such as this bear have many more olfactory receptors than a human being. Thus, they are able to detect and interpret much more olfactory sensory information. They use this information to navigate or even communicate with one another. The sense of smell is very powerful. It can tie back to memories, detect trillions and trillions of odors, alert one of danger, and give an organism important information about the changing environment surrounding them.
Small particles bind to receptors on the olfactory bulb. Then, the olfactory receptor cells are activated and will send electrical signals which are relayed through converged axons. Now, these signals are transmitted to higher regions of the brain. Kinesthesia allows you to sense where your body is in relation to itself in space. Our body is filled with position and motion sensors. They're in our muscles, tendons, and joints. The sensors supply constant feedback to our brain. Without it, we could not coordinate movements to walk, eat, swim, and more.
Along with kinesthesia comes a very important detection system called one's vestibular sense. Located in the ears, vestibular sense measures one's head position, movement, and spatial orientation. Vestibular senses act very quickly. For example, if you get dizzy, your vestibular senses work to correct your body's positioning almost immediately. The two major areas that play a key role in vestibular sense are the semicircular canals and the vestibular sacs. The semicircular canals detect movement of fluids within the ears. There are three major canals which each detect a different kind of movement. One canal detects upwards and downwards movements. The next will detect the change in side-to-side movements. And lastly, the last one will detect left and right movements. These canals are filled with endolymph fluids, which, when moved, will trigger the further movement of different stereocilia, also known as hair-like receptors. These receptors, when moved, send signals to the cerebellum, enabling your brain to sense and correct your body positioning. The vestibular sacs detect forward or backwards movement, and also gravitational forces. Within these sacs are calcium carbonate structures called alkaloids. The hair-like receptors are triggered when layers of otoconia crystals, or calcium carbonate crystals, shift due to these prior movements. Once again, when the hair-like receptors are moved, they send a signal to the brain, allowing it to interpret and change your body positioning.
So let's do a little experiment to test our vestibular sense. But first, so right now I'm a little bit dizzy. I'm having trouble balancing and I can't tell which way is up, down, left, or right. But why is this happening? Well, the fluid in our vestibular sacs and semicircular canals is spinning with me when I spin my head around, and therefore triggering all the receptor cells. But when I've stopped spinning, the fluid is inside the sacs is still spinning, and therefore my nerves are confused as to whether or not I'm facing up or down or left or right. But there is a way to prevent this.
Why do dancers spot? Well, I spot because then my head will remain straight, which means that there will be less fluid spinning around in my head. So, I will have better spatial awareness as well as balance.
So, all these different senses happen on different neural pathways and are processed in different parts of the brain. But what happens when some of these neural pathways start to overlap? Well, that helps to create the phenomenon that we call synesthesia, which is when the stimulation of one sensory pathway creates experiences in another. So synesthesia can take many different forms and it depends on the individual case. For example, the example we have here is that people will hear a musical note and see a color. Over the summer, I met an individual who had synesthesia where she would hear and speak different names and words, and it would be associated with different tastes. So she would go around and tell people how their different names would feel and have what taste they had. For example, Nico was cornflakes. My full name, Nicholas, was frosted cornflakes. I was trying to see if we had anyone who overlapped with over the summer and in this class, and the only person I can think of is Jessica. Shout out to Jessica. Jessie, which is not her actual name, but it's close, tasted like grape jelly. So everyone had a different flavor depending on what their name was. So these different sensory phenomena that we call synesthesia can happen.
Sensory interaction. The senses do not function in isolation. They influence and work together to emphasize each other. Picture this. Out of the corner of your eye, you see a door creak closed. Then, you suddenly hear little footsteps wandering about. When seeing a door closed, whilst hearing faint footsteps in the distance, one can make an inference that someone left the room. Thanks to your senses working together, this inference is plausible. Some other examples of senses working together are as follows. Sight helps with balance, and smell and touch help with taste. For example, when plugging your nose whilst eating broccoli, you may feel as though the broccoli tastes less intense or bad. When standing on one leg with your eyes closed, you are more likely to topple over. When eating a watermelon, the soft, watery texture paired with its intense taste may shift one's opinion on the fruit. But many times, our senses do not agree with one another. In cases like such, our brain tends to miss sensory inputs, sometimes creating a third perception. For example, if you visually see someone mouth the la movement, but audibly hear the word ga, you may perceive the experience as a whole as viewing and hearing a gla, mixing the two into a third perception. The brain and body work in unison with each other, also known as embodied cognition, or the influence of bodily sensations on cognitive interpretations and judgments. An example of embodied cognition is how physical warmth may promote social warmth. A study done by Dr. Ijersman and Simon showed that those who held a warm drink rather than a colder one felt more generous and comfortable and socially warm in a social area. The different parts of the brain, interpreting all these different sensory inputs, all work together to display our perceived sense of reality. All the sensory inputting areas are very close to each other, thus, they affect one another. Some parts of the brain are as follows. Vision is controlled by the occipital lobes. Hearing is interpreted by the temporal lobes. Touch by the somatosensory cortex. Taste is interpreted by the frontal temporal lobe border. Smell by the olfactory bulb, and lastly, kinesthesia and vestibular sense by the cerebellum.
Now let's do an experiment. My mother is gonna try a Dasani water bottle
Hate Dasani.
and an Evian water bottle with her eyes blindfolded, and she's gonna guess which is which. Okay?
I hope I can tell, because
Okay.
I really hate Dasani.
Okay, ready?
Okay.
Take a sip.
Okay.
Okay, what was that?
That was good.
That was good?
Uh-huh.
Okay. Okay, now try this.
Mm-mm. Nasty.
Which was which?
I think the first one was the Evian, the second one was the Dasani.
Okay, let's see.
Was I right?
Let's see if you're right.
Okay.
To know the answer.
Yes.
Actually, your senses were tricked.
I got it wrong?
You got it wrong. Okay,
And
so
I was violent about it.
your expectations helped you believe that like these were two different waters, but they were both Evian.
Ooh! I got played.
You got played.
Rocky tastes the blood, smells the sweat, feels the pain, hears the crowd, and struggles to stay upright. These are all the senses that we covered in the presentation today. When Rocky tastes the blood, he uses amongst his 5 main taste buds and receptors to interpret the sensory input. When he smells the sweat, odor molecules are binding to olfactory receptors, carrying information into the olfactory bulb and sensory input into the brain. When he feels the pain of the punch, his many tactile receptors are firing. He feels the warmth of the fighter's fist against his skin. He feels the cool air struggling to surround him, the pressure pounding against his body, and most importantly, the intense pain of the punch. And when he struggles to stay upright, his kinesthetic and vestibular senses are working together to bring the body back to homeostasis. The fluid within his ears triggered hairline receptors, notifying his brain that something was off. Rocky Balboa, in his intense match, showed the body's live-time interpretation of touch, taste, smell, and balance.
Thank you so much for listening to our presentation on taste, smell, touch, and balance and their interactions. And here are our references.
Thank you for paying attention to this presentation. Here is our honor code. I hope we aided you in helping understand how your senses interact with one another and how they work. I hope we helped you learn how to come to your senses. Thank you once more.